What if I told you that the largest organized campaign of torture and execution against women in human history was not carried out by a war criminal or a dictator? It was carried out by the most powerful institution in the Western world. In the name of God, over 300 years. And the women it hunted were not witches. They were healers, widows, midwives, landowners, and anyone who dared to exist outside the boundaries of what powerful men decided women should be. This is not folklore. This is not superstition. This is documented history, and it is long past time the world called it by its right name. So sit back, because what you are about to discover will permanently change how you understand 3 centuries of organized institutional violence. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us which other forgotten atrocities you want us to investigate. Let's dive in. Historians of mystery, imagine a Europe gripped by fear. Not the fear of invading armies or plague, though those were present too. A deeper, more intimate fear. The fear of your neighbor. The fear of the woman who delivered your children. The fear of the old woman who grew herbs at the edge of the village. The fear that the person next to you in the market, the person you had known your entire life, might be in league with the devil himself. That fear did not arise naturally. It was constructed, deliberately, systematically, by people who understood that a frightened population is a controllable one, and that the most effective way to frighten a population is to give them an enemy they cannot see, cannot reason with, and cannot defeat without the help of the very institution that told them the enemy existed in the first place. To understand what happened, we must first understand the world before it happened. In medieval Europe, women occupied a specific and in some ways surprisingly powerful role in their communities. Not powerful in the political sense, but powerful in the practical sense that mattered most to ordinary people's daily lives. Women were the healers, the midwives, the keepers of herbal knowledge passed down through generations. When a child was sick, when a woman was in labor, when an old man's joints ached in winter, it was not a physician they called. It was a woman who knew which plants to use and how to use them. This knowledge was real. It was effective. And it represented a form of authority that existed completely outside the control of the church. That was the problem. Not that these women were evil. Not that they were in league with supernatural forces. The problem was that they were trusted by their communities in ways that did not require the church as an intermediary. They offered comfort, healing, and guidance without a priest, without a confession, without an institutional blessing. And in a world where the church's power depended entirely on being the sole legitimate source of comfort, healing, and guidance, that independence was not just inconvenient. It was a direct threat to institutional authority. The mechanism that transformed this threat into a 300-year campaign of murder began with a book. In 1486, a Dominican friar named Heinrich Kramer published a document that would become one of the most dangerous books ever written. Its title was the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. It was not written as theology. It was written as a manual, a step-by-step operational guide for identifying, interrogating, torturing, and executing women accused of witchcraft. It told inquisitors what questions to ask, what signs to look for, how to extract a confession, what methods of torture were permissible and in what sequence to apply them. And most significantly, it established a theological framework that linked women, sexuality, and the devil into a single terrifying narrative. Women, Kramer argued, were by their very nature more susceptible to diabolical influence. More carnal, more weak, more dangerous. The Malleus Maleficarum went through multiple editions. It became a bestseller in the newly invented printing press era, and it gave institutional legitimacy and a practical methodology to the systematic persecution of women across an entire continent. 2 years before Kramer published his manual, Pope Innocent VIII had already laid the legal groundwork. In 1484, he issued a papal bull, an official decree with the full authority of the Church behind it, called Summis Deciderans Effectibus. It explicitly authorized and encouraged the prosecution of witchcraft in Germany. It gave Kramer and his colleagues the official mandate they needed. The hunt had the blessing of the highest authority in Christendom, and it spread from Germany to France, from France to Scotland, from Scotland to England, from England to the American colonies. Everywhere the church held power, the accusation of witchcraft became a weapon. But here is what the history books rarely tell you clearly enough. The witch trials were not primarily a religious phenomenon. They were a social, economic, and political one dressed in religious clothing. Look at who was actually accused. Not random women, specific women. Widows who had inherited property and had no male protector to defend them in court. Midwives who had knowledge and community trust that gave them influence. Women who had argued with a neighbor over land or livestock. Women who refused to conform to the social expectations of their gender. Women who were old, who were different, who were alone. The accusation of witchcraft was extraordinarily useful as a tool for resolving property disputes, eliminating social competition, and punishing female independence. You did not need evidence. You needed an accusation. And once the accusation was made, the process that followed was designed not to establish innocence but to produce a confession. The methods used to produce those confessions are among the most disturbing chapters in European history. Sleep deprivation for days. The strappado, in which the accused was suspended by their wrists tied behind their back and dropped repeatedly. The systematic examination of the body for so-called witches' marks, any birthmark or irregularity of skin that could be declared evidence of a diabolical pact. The swimming test, in which the accused was thrown into water. If she floated, she was guilty. If she sank and drowned, she was innocent but already dead. These were not the actions of people who believed they were finding witches. These were the actions of people who needed confessions to justify executions that had already been decided. And under sufficient torture, anyone will confess to anything. The accused, desperate for the pain to stop, would confess. And in confessing would be required to name accomplices. Each confession generating new accusations, new arrests, new torture. The machine fed itself. It is important to understand that this was not exclusively a Catholic phenomenon. Some of the most intense witch hunting in European history occurred in Protestant regions. Germany, which was largely Protestant by the height of the witch hunting period, saw some of the worst atrocities. Scotland, under Presbyterian influence, executed a higher proportion of its population as witches than almost any other country in Europe. The religious justification crossed denominational lines because the underlying motivations, fear, social control, property disputes, the punishment of female independence, were not religious at all. They were human, and deeply, terribly universal. Between approximately 1450 and 1750, historians estimate that between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed as witches across Europe. Approximately 75 to 80% of them were women. Those numbers represent not the full scale of the persecution but only those who reached execution. The number accused, imprisoned, tortured, and destroyed without being executed is vastly higher. Communities torn apart. Families fractured. Women who survived the accusation but lost everything: their reputations, their property, their place in their communities. The witch hunt was not a series of isolated local panics. It was a continent-wide systemic pattern that operated for 3 centuries. And yet the world remembers it as folklore, as superstition, as a kind of historical embarrassment attributable to ignorance rather than power. We remember Salem and we think of a small colonial town temporarily gripped by mass hysteria. We do not think of it as one node in a 300-year network of institutional violence. We have Halloween costumes of witches, and we do not think of the tens of thousands of women who were tortured until they confessed to being exactly what those costumes depict. The naming of this history, as superstition rather than atrocity, as hysteria rather than persecution, is itself an act of power. It is a choice about whose suffering deserves to be remembered as serious and whose can be reduced to a costume. The women who were killed were not witches. They were people. They had names, families, communities, knowledge, and lives. They were killed because they were vulnerable, because they were useful targets, and because the institutions that should have protected them chose instead to destroy them. That is not a supernatural story. That is a political one. And it is the same story that has been told in different forms throughout history. Whenever powerful institutions decide that the most effective way to maintain control is to identify an enemy within, give that enemy a name, and make the act of destroying that enemy a holy obligation. The form changes. The mechanism does not. 300 years. 40,000 to 60,000 dead. 75% of them women. That is not superstition. That is a war. And it is time we called it one. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video and are passionate about this kind of content, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming videos and can discover more fascinating stories. See you in the next video.